Did you always have access to money, your own account, your own wage, and you've been told it couldn't really have been financial abuse? Do you look back now and see money that was quietly missing, or decisions you somehow never got a say in, a settlement that's been dragged out just long enough to wear you down? Or have you been told that maybe even by your own lawyer that what really happened isn't worth bringing up at all? And underneath it all, you're still quietly wondering whether you're even allowed to call it abuse. Today's episode will be perfect for you. We asked you all to send in your questions about coercive control, and oh my goodness, you did. There were so many, we had to turn it into a 6-part series, and today we're up to part 3, the money. Financial abuse, the part of coercive control that hides inside bank accounts, businesses, superannuation, settlement negotiations, and unspoken rules and looks that you have to follow. And to help us answer them, we have our very special guest back with us today, Krasi Kirova. Welcome, Krasi.
Welcome, Laura. Welcome, Lynn.
Hello, I'm Laura, divorced mother of 3, and I'm here with my mother, Lynette Galvin, with 35 years' experience in family law. You're listening to the Divorce Course podcast. Through our candid discussions, we hope to help you through your divorce or de facto separation. We will be answering the most commonly asked questions and covering the stages and steps that you will face on your way to freedom.
Now, Krasi is a clinical psychologist and board-approved supervisor who helps break people free from worn-out familiar patterns and to live life on their own terms. Drawing on both her professional expertise and her own first-hand family experience, she's got a deep interest in supporting people through domestic violence, coercive control, and emotional abuse. And because so many of these questions also have the legal edge, we have, as we always do here, Mum as well, and she is a family law accredited specialist, and she will be giving us all the great tips that she always does. So welcome, Krasi, and thanks for coming back, Mum, as you always do, because you're here pretty much every week. So before we get started, the questions that came through, like Krasi's been busily going through them and kind of getting them into an order for us. But underneath it was really just this thing people were going, was it really that bad? Is it really that bad? People are telling them, don't talk about it, don't mention it. The law's not going to care. The court's not going to care. And there's also that flip side of some people having a lot of money but somehow thinking, am I the one that's experiencing the financial abuse? So we're going to talk about those today. But everything we share today, guys, just a reminder, is general education only. It's not legal advice, and it's also not a diagnosis of your situation. If anything lands a little too close, please be gentle with yourself. Reach out for support. We'll give you the numbers at the end. But again, just in case you need to know them, they are 1-800-RESPECT. And also Lifeline 13 11 14. And if you're in immediate danger, always call the emergency police department in your country, which is, of course, in Australia, 000. All right, let's get into all of the questions. Lots of questions today, so we're going to try and get to as many as we can and maybe join some together. But this, I think, is a really important question to just get an understanding for anyone listening today, a little bit about it. This question is from Katie. And again, guys, we're not using people's real names, and these are not exactly the situation that was told to us. So you won't be able to identify this person, but we're just using the gist of the question for Krasi. So Katie's question, and obviously not her name, a tricky question on financial abuse. I often see it considered when the other party controls access to the finances, or perhaps pressures a partner not to work. But in my case, I worked 2 jobs while my partner lay on the couch. He actively sought out work for me, even saying I should take 2 professional roles at once. He insisted all the funds go into a joint account and then spent it recklessly, cleaned us out with gambling, and I later found out drugs and sex workers. I feel I was financially abused, yet the courts don't seem to have this scenario in mind since it doesn't look like the stereotypical situation. What are your thoughts on this? So I'll get Krasi to answer first, and then we'll talk about the court's view.
Hey, it actually sounds like quite a few situations that I hear about, and I wanted to give a proper answer to this. So I went digging a little bit also on the research papers on economic abuse, and I think they provide a very good overview of this, because when we talk about economic abuse, and it's not just financial abuse, there is a wider term used, which is economic abuse. There are 3 separate constructs or areas that go underneath it. One is the economic control. So this is what I think most people initially think of in terms of someone who's being not given access to money, who has to account for every financial decision, who's being monitored in how they're spending, and doesn't have decision-making power. Then the second area is what's called employment sabotage. So that's the prevention of someone's career and financial capacity, including in the future. But the third area, and I think this is really what we're talking about here and in a lot of the cases, it's what is being called economic exploitation. So while financial control is about restricting a partner's access to money, so very often they may not have that, financial exploitation is really about a pattern of unfairly benefiting from a partner's financial resources and their earning capacity. And that's being done through entitlement, manipulation, coercion, or chronic irresponsibility. And I found that one also very interesting. So someone, for example, who refuses to look and take on a job when there's no reasonable causes for that, I would call that kind of chronic irresponsibility as well. So again, financial abuse is not just about controlling the access to money. It's the exploitation is about extracting disproportionate financial benefits while avoiding that fair contributions and leaving the partner to bear an unfair share of the economic burden. And I really think this is what Katie and a lot of other, especially professional women who have, or who might be the breadwinners or who have high earning capacity are talking about. That's what we are seeing here. Including financial exploitation would be that spending of household income on either things like luxury items, gambling, alcohol, drugs, discretionary purchases. I don't know if we can call sex worker discretionary purchases, but that's what it would be, while at the same time expecting the partner to cover all the essential living expenses and also to bear the consequences of their reckless spending.
What does the family court usually think about this kind of behaviour?
I don't know that I've seen a recent case about it, Laura, because I just haven't seen a recent case. I think generally if they're being exploited, the word slavery came up in my mind when you first described that situation. So it is a form of economic abuse. The definition in 4AB talks about financial abuse, and it says this isn't everything. This is financial and economic abuse is coercive control, and then they go on to talk about coercive control.
Right. Realistically, I think it's important to note the distinction. There are two types, I think, that we're seeing is the one where they're making the other person work and slave and do everything from looking after the kids, cleaning the house and working, while the other person just sits on the couch. But then there's the other type of economic abuse, that Krasi, that where it's the other person is the stay-at-home parent. They clean, they look after the kids, they're doing all the things at home, but they don't have access to money and they're not allowed access to money. That's a different...
Yes, and not allowed to build up their earning capacity or to take on any kind of career progression and education. And I think I would like to add, because when I look at a lot of the definitions and examples that are given for coercive control, generally they tend to only cover that financial control and career stalling. But just because it's not in official definitions or it's not in the law in that way, doesn't make it any less real or true or harmful. And I think the exploitation part is probably the one that gets given less attention, but it's very highly prevalent.
Yeah.
And it may be, Laura, so that it gets offset because presumably after the property settlement, the person with the higher income, higher earning capacity will go on to make that money. And so any adjustment that might have happened because of the violence and abuse, economic abuse, may be offset by that. And that might be why we're not seeing so many cases at the moment of that sort of thing.
It's unfair though. So Casey's question, again, not her name. My husband hasn't worked for 10 years. When I ask him to find a job to help with the bills and raising our 2 kids, he says, I can make 3 times as much as him, so I should actually just work more. I work 4 long shifts as a medical professional. We're in a high credit card debt. 1 child has a lot of high needs, and I'm exhausted. I barely ask him to find a job anymore because he gets so angry about it. He says I should get another loan to help pay down the credit cards. Why won't he work? I feel I have to keep working to pay bills, groceries, and insurance. Everyone else I know goes on holidays, but we never do. I'm so exhausted. Is this coercive control? Krasi?
Is this economic exploitation? Yes, absolutely. Is there also financial economic control? I'm not sure based on what is being described. It's likely that there is, at least to some extent. Is there coercive control as a bigger pattern that underlies the whole dynamic of this relationship? I don't think any of us can answer that certainly one way or the other, because you can absolutely have financial misuse and financial abuse in a relationship without necessarily having coercive control as well as the underlying dynamic. But typically when you have coercive control, you're going to have at least some kind of financial misuse. But I think this is, again, not at all an uncommon setup where the victimized partner is the breadwinner and they're the ones shouldering the biggest financial burden, but also at the same time, the majority of the household duties, the parenting duties, and so on. They might even be pressured, like in this case, to take out loans, again, to service the needs of the other partner. So even though the partner in this case, I think her name was Casey, she does have access to money, it doesn't mean that she has freedom in the relationship. There is still that feeling of being trapped and not having autonomy because the decisions they're making don't feel joint decisions. They feel imposed on her in the relationship.
Mum, what would you recommend Casey did?
Casey, I'm worried that if your case came to family court in the future, the court does have a kind of propensity to saying, what you tolerated in the marriage or the arrangements you made in your lives during the marriage that's up to you guys. And I worry they're a bit black and white in that regard. The good news is, I suppose, is if you've got the capacity to leave, you've got money to go. But I am worried that the court will just say, that was how you structured your life. We're not going to revisit that. So it's a bit negative, doesn't it? I'm so sorry, but yeah.
No, but Wes, what you're saying, Mum, is if that's not what you want, Casey, then it's a good idea to see someone and find a way out of that, because the family court may not be very supportive of the arrangement and might not help. But that I can see how exhausted you are. And like this, we've talked about it before, Mum. It was gold diggers, the reverse story, and these are all giving that vibe of where someone's just sitting on the couch doing nothing and the other person is doing everything, and it's horrible for them. Let's get into Anne's question. Is this financial abuse or economic abuse? If I always earned enough money and always had access to money. At the start of our relationship, my ex was building a business while I was helping us financially using the equity in my home. Once the business became successful, we each contributed equally to the mortgage and household expenses. But he always kept his business finances separate from mine. A few years later, he developed an expensive hobby that he called his second business. And without my knowledge, he was diverting large amounts of money through accounts I couldn't access. I recently obtained bank statements showing all this money transferred into the hobby in just 1 year. I believe we lost lots. I'm just going to try and keep the numbers out of it over the course of the marriage, but in the hundreds of thousands. Whenever I questioned him about money, he would always lie, deny, become defensive, drink heavily, misuse medication, and sometimes become aggressive. He never hit me, but I learned that asking questions wasn't worth the consequences, so I stopped. We've now been separated for 3 years. We're still in court, and after looking at the financial records, I've discovered what I suspected all along was happening. He has since claimed that he's unwell mentally and has stopped working and is seeking a 60-40% property settlement in his favour. I feel I was controlled by his behaviour and financially abused by his secret spending. Is this financial abuse and coercive control? I was never hit and I always had access to money. Krasi.
It's absolutely financial exploitation because, again, there is that extraction of the resources without the partner's knowledge for discretionary purposes and putting the partner at the same time at risk or disadvantage while doing it. And this was all being done not through any communication, not through joint decision-making, but this was through lying, denial about money, taking over the financial decisions, placing very negative consequences on any questions asked, so it shut down any ability to talk about it. And I think when someone acts this way in the economic and financial domain, it's quite likely that this doesn't spew out in other domains of the relationship as well. I know that's not what is being talked about here, but realistically and from what I know, you don't just disrespect and overwhelm one partner in one area of the relationship so much, but then treat them with respect and consideration in other areas. So in terms of the question, is this coercive control? I don't know, but I'd be looking at the other domains, and I have a feeling that it probably is. And it's very telling that Anne is talking about, I learned to stop asking questions.
Oh, yes.
This is obviously a survival response in the relationship. It's not because it was okay by Anne or she didn't think it was important enough. She just knew it would cause too many problems if she did. So that feeling of being controlled and trapped into the relationship, it comes from that lack of partnership and where choices were again forced and not made jointly.
And isn't that how the Casey, I think it was, she stopped asking her partner to get a job because of the explosion. It's control. It's clearly
yes,
control.
it's control, but it's control through enforcing negative consequences, which I think is, again, something that the court has difficulty seeing because they look for that straightforward, obvious, overt control where you're denying something to someone, but coercive control at the heart of it is about enforcing the fear of negative consequences. So the abused partner starts avoiding those negative consequences by not asking, not speaking up, not complaining, just complying before anyone even has to ask them to do it. And that's what makes it look like it's not controlling maybe on the outside, but it is.
I think, and that him opening up that other account and having other money, spending it on his other hobby without you knowing about it, means that he has put at risk the property pool, and he may be reducing it so that when you do have your property settlement, this may be a strategy for him. So it is absolutely coercive control in the eyes of the court. And to the extent that you lent him money at the beginning or you got involved in them at the beginning of the business and then he froze you out, I think that would have caused you a lot of stress, economic stress. And it may be when you look at the history of the relationship that you'll be able to put that in under the category of Section 4AB of the Family Law Act. And it talks about coercing a family member, including use of threats, physical abuse or emotional or psychological abuse, to give or seek money, assets or other items, and to do other things or falsely denying things done and hiding receipts and all of those things. The thing is that it's not its intention doesn't matter. It's how it made her feel.
Okay. Big hugs to you, Anne. We're going to talk a bit more about where the money is, hidden accounts and moved assets. So this question is from Jenny. Obviously not Jenny. My ex is very subtle at manipulation. Before leaving, he was very aggressive, yelling constantly. The kids and I had to leave and get out. Since then, he has not lifted a single finger in terms of communication of settlement. I've done so much legwork already without delays. He does not even write back to emails, only if it looks good for him around the kids. In the relationship, he would tire me out by being avoidant and make me do all the housework, then gaslight me gaslight me about my worth as a mother. I see the same patterns again, all the assets under his business, and he is delaying that conversation. He is buying a new car, spending a fortune on a house, and won't reply to get the settlement happening. What can I do? I'm so tired with 4 kids, single parenting, oh my gosh, and him ignoring my emails anyway. He wants to make me do all the work so he can create the confusion. That is a lot for Jenny. Krasi, what have you got to say? And then Mum, if you can tell us maybe what she can do.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I feel because it sounds like so much, and it illustrates again that one of the hardest things to spot and to prove as an aspect of emotional abuse is not the things someone is doing, but it's the things they're not doing.
Yeah.
And there's so much of that in the story, that chronic evasion of joint responsibilities, the lack of equal and fair participation in the household, the delayed tactics, that lack of cooperation. It's all about absences as well. And it's hard to explain that to an outsider. And I think it sounds like it's not just about the exit strategy to create confusion. I think it's very much about trying to come out in a better position through this whole. They're still dictating the pace of the relationship and the separation. They're still splitting resources. They're still absorbing as much as possible what they can get out of it. I think that's probably the real point of what they're doing. But yeah, no wonder that the impact of all this absence is this kind of exhaustion, depletion, which is not just mental and financial resources, it's on every level.
I think that he is also doing post-separation abuse. The fact that you and your children had to leave the house and then there he is sitting pretty and refusing to cooperate, that's to be treated, I would think, by the court the same as someone who refuses to do disclosure. And the court recently, in a case, and the name escapes me, but they found, the judge said, I'm not sure that I can make a finding that there was abuse, coercive control during the relationship. These last 2 years, where the parties have been in court or planning to go to court, the communications have absolutely been disrespectful, and he classed it as control and classed it as violence, and then gave the wife, it was 14% extra because of the behaviour. And Jenny, I know it's hard, but you might have to think about at least sending that notice of intention to file that they have in the courts to get his attention. I know you're exhausted, and that's the plan, I guess. And while he's sitting in the house not paying anything, I presume not paying rental anyway, he's just what we called sitting pretty, Laura, didn't we?
Yeah, and it's a strategy to wear you down so you give up and walk away.
And you might want to look at getting maybe an order that he leave the house and that you and your children can go back in, or you and your daughters can go back in.
And I'll really quickly just say we did get an email just recently from someone who's just finally got their court, court
orders?
Or their court judgment, and coercive control was found. It was 70, like a very long report, and there was consequences for that. So that it is happening in some courts. We're hearing it's happening in some courts. So let's quickly get to this question. Caritas. Hi, Caritas. How should I help him accept that we will not be a couple anymore and start the property settlement conversation at the same time? Krasi.
I would absolutely be saying, Caritas, it is not your job to make him accept. It's just about making your intentions very clear. So don't worry about whether he's going to accept your decision or not, but be clear and precise in what you're saying. So being consistent, being brief, not engaging in long talks about the relationship or entertaining the insinuations about getting back together. The feeling would be that this kind of maybe love bombing or wanting to get back together might actually be just another stalling strategy rather than even genuine intentions at that stage. But no wonder, given you don't have the trust, you don't want to be having these conversations. Just accepting any steps towards independence and separation are going to prompt some kind of negative reaction from the other side, but that should not be the reason not to proceed and go forward.
So basically, Krasi, you're saying don't just do the property settlement part, leave the other bit out because it's not your job.
Yes, and don't worry about creating a particular good reaction from the other side because that is simply impossible. Mm-hmm. That's not where you want to put your effort.
No. Point. That is very valid. I do hear a lot of people worrying that if they can just calm their ex down, if they can just get them to understand their point of view, that then their divorce and their property settlement will work well. But it'll work well until you say something they don't like hearing again. Yeah.
Or if you could do it, you probably wouldn't be even separating.
Right.
That's probably the reason why you're separating, because you couldn't do it for years in the relationship.
And isn't it a form of control also that he's not accepting it? That puts it all on her. It's your problem. You did this. I would have wanted to come back. Yeah.
All right. Let's get to the evidence side of things because we've got some questions about proving it when it's quiet or when it's covert. So we're going to talk about what the court looks for and how to prove a pattern. So let's go to Zara's question. Again, not her name. How likely is it that a case of subtle coercive control can be successfully recognised and proven in court when there is no physical violence or obvious criminal behaviour? In this situation, the perpetrator engages in long-term pattern of severe emotional, psychological and financial abuse that has left the victim isolated without family or community support and feeling hopeless. The children are also suffering from the effects of the abuse. Because the controlling behaviour is often subtle and occurs behind closed doors, many professionals fail to recognise the pattern. What evidence is usually needed in these cases, and what steps can victims take when they feel their experiences are not being understood or believed? All right, so let's go to Mum first. What kind of evidence does the court look for, Mum, when it comes to this kind of behaviour?
Sometimes there isn't much evidence other than anecdotal evidence that the wife can say. As you say, it happens behind closed doors. So the court expects that. And they're adept, I think, at reading family violence, coercive control patterns, even when the wife or whoever it is may only be able to a couple of events clearly with dates and times. It's not the same standard as criminal. So as long as you can put in a little bit of it, set the tone, then the evidence that the court has is usually enough. And then in the witness box, the husband it's usually the husband, be questioned about that. But it's been very heartening. The court has said in Dajani and Dajani that the court can infer that someone's contribution was harder, more arduous, as a result of someone's behaviour, just on the strength of one incident. And it is often easier to prove also the coercive control post-separation, like someone who won't get involved in the property settlement side of things. And that allows the court then to either make an adjustment based on post-separation or infer or see that the post-separation abuse, of which they have got evidence, because mostly it's in writing and in the conduct of a case, does fit the pattern throughout the relationship. So it's about stories. You've got to make it live for the judge. And they may have never been in a situation where taking $20 extra out at the ATM is going to result in you're the silent treatment for 2 weeks. That's happened to someone I know. And it might seem that's so petty, but silent treatment is a form of abuse, and everyone walking on eggshells looks into that cycle. So don't be disheartened. I think there are gatekeepers, aren't there, Laura? We hear them, like the lawyers who, oh, lady, you won't get anywhere with that. And people going, where are the bruises? The police disrespecting you. But I'm really seeing cases where the court, they understand it. They understand it. But you've just got to, the other side of the cases, the lawyer on the other side of the cases, and have hope. Someone asked if they should put the family violence in their first lot of material, the coercive control. Really, they should, but there are going to be consequences.
Yes, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I think when it comes to emotional, psychological and financial abuse, and there's no good side to going through any of that, but when it comes to getting proof, financial abuse is a lot easier to prove because you can show this is your budget, this is what you were living on, this is what it became the minute you separated, this is the questions you asked, this is you asking for money, this is you begging for money, this is the consequences of not having the money. And that really can be very black and white to a judge. The psychological and emotional, like you said, Mum, in evidence, you've got to really just make them live it, put them through it and show the story, which again is quite horrible to go through if someone's writing that because you've got to relive it. But if you can get that story in there, because I think a lot of people think the family court is like a criminal court, and it's not. They literally go, it's he said, she said, or she said, or he said, and they choose which one they believe. And usually you can say, this is what happened and have no proof. And you may go in the witness box and you get questioned and the judge may choose to believe you. So it's not, you don't have any evidence if you don't have papers or photos or anything. Write your notes, keep your dates, keep a chronology, and be really systematic about keeping this all written down, because one of the things you'll find if it's emotional as well is you're going to forget it. So write it down and you will be believed if you can get that story across successfully. Now, Krasi, can I ask you, what does Zara do about the fact that the professionals fail to recognise the pattern?
Oh, I absolutely understand that pain, because when that feeling of not being believed really mirrors what the abuse was all about, the distortion and the gaslighting. And so to come out and to have done the hard work to come out of this relationship and then to be facing people in professional roles that are supposed to support you and help you get what's fair, and them not believing, and you almost feeling like you have to prove to them, not even to a judge, but to a lawyer or to a psychologist or to an IC or whoever that might be, that's an awful feeling. And I really always encourage people to try and seek out professionals, again, whether it's a lawyer, a therapist, or whoever you're hiring, that really gets it. And it might take a bit longer. I agree, not everyone gets it. Not everyone has received the proper training, but there are also a lot of people out there who get it. So if you don't feel comfortable with someone, if you feel like you're having to prove yourself to them over and over, if they're challenging and questioning you all the time, and I have heard plenty of stories like that from my clients, then by all means, don't stay any longer than you have to in this kind of relationship. Just move on and find someone else. And just one other thing I wanted to add in terms of how to even start putting together that story of coercive control, because again, it being so subtle and very often physical abuse will be absent from it. And I think that's what courts and police always go to first. So when it's absent, where do I even begin my story? the 3Ds are a good starting point to help people start thinking across the different domains. So we have the demeaning and the devaluating attitude, we have the disempower, and we have the distortion. All of these are separate domains, so you want to start looking across all of them. And I have put together a handout on this on my website. Anyone can freely get access to it. Even if you use that as your starting point, as you're starting to compile several examples in each of these categories, that's going to help you start building up a story.
And you must tell the court, because the court must consider it. And so as long as it's safe to do, you can start putting it together. And like I said, they don't stop after separation because some people don't actually know they're doing it. And they do it again in the witness box.
That's true. And when it comes to putting it into an affidavit form, you can actually use, once you've written all of those things down, you can then slot them into the different categories that Mum lists out in the Family Law Act that they'll be looking at. If you are interested in doing that, we've got that Family Court companion course that is coming out. And we also have an episode on affidavit writing and coercive control documentation that I'll put in the show notes for anybody who's doing that. So good luck, Sarah. We wish you the best. These two questions I'm going to read out together and then I'll get you guys to answer them, okay? So this is from M and Jess. So M's question is, how can I prove coercive control? There is also financial abuse, which is easier to prove evidence for, but I want to proceed with the DVO. But how can I do this lacking evidence? I'm also worried about the repercussions as this will fire my ex up further. And then Jess's question was for someone who has felt erased and invalidated by a system that should recognise coercive control. How can I prove to them or to a court that there's emotional abuse and coercive control where the tactics are covert, calculated and strategically hidden behind the facade and plausible deniability? For example, a textbook example of coercive control is you're not allowed to see these people. His covert version was triangulation and a narrative control with people so that when I reached out to them, they wouldn't believe me and would stop contact, which has had the same result as cutting off my support networks. How do I prove that? So I guess both M and Jess are really struggling with proof when it comes to this kind of thing. And I know we've just talked about the 3Ds with Krasi, and go and have a look at that worksheet. We'll put that in the show notes and link to our website. And we've talked about the documentation. But Mum, have you got anything else that you would like to say to M?
Yes, I think of itself, if you put that in your affidavit or in whatever evidence you're giving to your local court about family violence, put that they got to your family and friends before you did. That sort of isolation is absolutely textbook, isn't it? It's in our narcissist playbook, Laura, that they will run to try and get all of your friends and family on side and isolate you, either to bring you back or to make you feel worse about yourself and doubt yourself. Those things that you've read out from both of those people, put them in your affidavit and tell them. So in Pickford, they say here, when you're trying to work out whether a person's engaged in behaviour that controls or coerces a member, the court has to look at the behaviour, then identify the full context of the behaviour, and then identify the impact, and then take into account all the relevant things, then consider what weight to give it. So this is what the courts are doing. So I'm confident that from up the top, they're educated about these things. And it is just some of the myriad things that people do when you're being coercively controlled.
Krasi, can I just ask as well, she said, how I'm worried about repercussions as this will fire my ex up further. And we've talked about this a little bit already, where people are just really worried about even just bringing it up or having the proof is it's going to make their exes mad. And what do you say to M?
You're right, it's probably going to, but they're already doing what they're doing. They're already coercively controlling and abusing you anyway. So if you continue the strategy, which was very helpful and necessary while you were in the relationship, which is trying not to push their buttons, trying not to create any negative escalation or say the wrong thing, then if you keep doing that when you've now separated and you have to fight for your rights, it's not going to really play in your favor. So I would say you have to do the things that are going to be helpful to you, and you have to start stepping out of that constant reference point where it's always about, but what would they say? What would they do? Because that fear is going to stop you from ever pushing forward.
Members, have we seen, Mum, over the years that they're too afraid, and I understand, and my heart goes out to you guys, because of course you don't want to do anything if you're afraid. It's the common sense thing to avoid it. But we've seen so many people tiptoe around property settlement or tiptoe around kids stuff, and they just paddle on the edges of settlement, and it just drags on. And then they're 3 years down the track and everything's a mess. They've hidden stuff, and they always say, I wish I'd just done this sooner, because eventually they do have to say it. They do have to ask for settlement, and then they get the repercussions from that person anyway. The behavior happens anyway. So you kind of got to decide, do I face that behavior now, or do I wait 3 years and a lot of legal fees and wait and face it later? Now, some of you might not be strong enough yet. You might need to find a psychologist to support you to get to that level and to get to that ability. But if anyone's listening today who is holding off because they just don't want to upset their ex, please know we've heard so many stories of people who regret it. As long as you've got a safety plan, you've spoken to the police, they know that your situation, and you have got the right support, it's time to stop avoiding that, and it's time to look out for yourself. And Krasi said, if every question you ask to your lawyer or support person is, but what if my ex says this, or will this upset my ex? You're asking the wrong questions.
Yes, I agree. And an old lawyer I used to work with years ago, before the family violence was recognised really, he said that he thought my client had trained her husband to get away with everything, to rule the roost and her not to react. And I thought that was an outrageous thing to say at the time. But what your ex is actually doing is training you not to push back.
Exactly. And that continues after the separation. And sometimes, absolutely, it's warranted because you do want to avoid escalation, knowing what the risk level is. But a lot of the times, it's just an automatic continuation of what you did to survive and get through the relationship. And it's time to change strategy and tactic. And Laura, can I just add one more thing before we need to move on to the next question, which is in terms of how to show coercive control in documentation? And correct me if I'm wrong, but Lynn, I think you were saying impact as well is a very important part of demonstrating it. And I think that's what sometimes people forget. They focus so much on how can I explain the ex's behaviors, and they don't look that bad. But I think if you take on the position where you're really focusing on the impact. So, for example, in the question we were reading out, I became cut off from social support networks because of continued interference on the part of my ex, then you're really talking about the impact. You don't have to focus specifically on all the different strategies that you use. That's a different way of doing it. And you can also talk about the impact on your children as well. So you can describe, for example, how you have been chronically devaluated and demeaned as a partner and through the relationship throughout. And that is already illustrating aspects of the coercive control.
And could show up in the children. If they're watching it, that's what they're learning.
Yes, exactly. And I do have a handout on the emotional impact, on all the different kinds of impact of emotional abuse again on my website. Good. It's a 4-page, it's quite comprehensive, so it might help.
Might jog memories, yeah. And I think when it comes to that, like that evidence and the paper trail, etc., if you said, I tried to call them to talk about settlement and they didn't answer, it doesn't sound so bad. But if you've tried to call them and talk about settlement 20 times, and in the middle of those times, they've gone and bought a new house, they've bought a new car, if you put all of that into chronology, that sounds pretty bad. On its own, someone buying a new car, no big whoop. But someone buying a new car when somebody else is trying to get property settlement, and you look at the pattern, that's the big whoop. So putting it all together in a chronology can really share the story, because these kind of poopy heads, they tend to try and do things that on their own, on surface value, look fine. But when you look at how it happens and in the context of what's going on, that's when you go, actually, that's really bad behavior. And it's a little bit like mean girl energy in high school, where the mean girls, they just do this look or they say this thing, and to a teacher, it doesn't look like a bad thing, but to the kid next to them just goes off going really upset, and the teacher doesn't understand why. But it's because they've been doing it the whole week. It's that kind of behavior that you have to explain the context. So all those little things are a really good idea. So let's get into pushed, rushed, and pressured to sign. These are the questions where people are feeling like pressure is being put on them. So this person's name is Trying Hard. I don't think it's their real name, but that's their name. And good for them. So my separated husband is pushing very hard for decisions on how our assets will be split. I'm feeling pushed to decide before I'm ready as I don't have enough information yet. He keeps accusing me of stalling, I'm not, and telling me how I can do X, Y, and Z with a cash settlement, while he gets to keep the property and his super intact. I asked to use a mediator for negotiations, but he said, it's another delaying tactic from you. Followed by, I won't be a part of that. If you're going to try and do that, we may as well go straight to the lawyers and then you'll get even less. I'm finding it hard to push back because I do want a fair outcome for both of us, and I'm worried about how he is portraying me to our adult children and others. Should I communicate in writing only? Krasi, let's go to you first, and then Mum will ask you about that bit as well.
Yeah, I would definitely say it sounds like the ex is pushing for a very quick asset division that really best protects their own personal interest. They're not really pursuing any fairness, or at least maybe just their idea of what fair is. So I don't know that you can get a fair outcome for both of us where we both agree that it's going to be equally fair. But it sounds like the pushback is absolutely a reasonable attempt to put the brakes on the exigency and attempts to really force a decision on you. They're framing it as this is what's fair and this is what's right for you to do. But really what they're doing is they're forcing a decision, and it's just a deflection out of the abuse they're doing. So I would once again advise any listener, do not attach your actions on the objective of keeping the peace at any cost, or keeping them happy, as this is probably an impossible task. So instead, know your rights, communicate briefly, probably in writing in this case, and just put your efforts where they matter. And they're not rightfully put into trying to create the best kind of reaction out of them. That is not going to happen.
And Mum, when it comes to mediation, it's something that you recommend everyone does, don't you, if it's safe?
Yes, but if they won't, that doesn't stop you going to court. The lady said she's got adult children. And I think what he's doing is trying to get you to settle before you have full disclosure. And it seems to me he's trying to get your adult kids on side, so he is isolating you. And wasn't it interesting that you were talking about you want what's fair for both of you, because I think that's very different to what he wants. He wants yeah, that's right. Your rights are your rights. The only thing about putting too much in writing is that he will probably show the adult children. But if you can afford to go and get some advice straight away about where you stand, I bet you he has. I bet you he knows exactly what you're entitled to, and he doesn't want that to happen. And then when you're safe and you feel that you can, then you can go for your claim. Lots of people do. And all you have to say to your kids is, look, it's fair for me to have property. It's not all his.
We do see this a lot in grey divorce, don't we, Mum? That the kids are dragged into it, and then they seem to pick sides if they're being coerced or manipulated by a particular side. If you are experiencing that, we've got a really good episode about grey divorce. I think it's actually called Splitting Silver Hairs or something. I'll put it in the link in the show notes, but it does give you some really good strategies on how to set up those boundaries with the kids, your adult kids, so it doesn't become this football match, basically, between who they're going to cheer for and that kind of thing. It's quite horrible. Big hugs to you trying hard. And let's go on to Alex. Alex said, how can I stop my emotionally abusive and coercive controlling ex from using our adult children to pressure me into signing his proposed financial settlement before I've sought clarity on the issue myself? It sounds like Alex and trying hard probably have the same ex. So, Mum, any strategies that you can remember that we talked about in that last episode? Splitting hairs.
Pressuring the kids to take a side. The thing is, if the children have had an absent or emotionally absent parent in your ex, and then suddenly he's coming crying to them everything, even if they're adults, it's just natural. You do have to just stick to your guns, do the process, trust the process.
What kind of things should Alex be doing in regards to the children's situation?
Yeah, I think in reality, you can't really stop what someone else is going to tell the children. You can't really prevent it. You can only manage the effects once they do that, if that's what they choose to do. And I would say in these situations, the best buffer against these kind of manipulative attempts to put pressure or to undermine relationships is really the quality of your own relationships as well with the children. So that's where I'd be putting my effort, really having good open communication, explaining clearly and rationally why you're making the choices you are. They're adults, so they should be able to understand some of that. Just reminding them that what's happening is between you and your ex, and you don't really want them to be involved in it. I think a lot of the times adult children don't really want to be involved in it. They just become involved because someone's pulling them in it. So if you can show them that you've got it and you want to handle it on your own, it will become quite obvious to them who's the person really dragging them into it, rather who's trying to act in a more mature way. But yes, I would stress that biggest buffer between an abusive ex attempts to use children against you and to apply pressure is the quality of your relationship with them. So just focusing on maintaining that rather than, again, trying to prevent your ex from doing certain things.
Because I guess whether they're old adults or whether they're young kids, these kind of people seem to just want to drag everybody into it, don't they?
Absolutely. It's all about their own personal interests. They don't really consider the interest of the peace of the children. It's really about them coming out on top and having their version of the story be the more prominent one.
Horrible. Yeah. So, Krasi, you've got a questionnaire at the moment because you're going to be talking to professionals in the future. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how people can get involved?
Yes, thank you, Laura, about the opportunity. I want to put a call out to all our listeners to send in some of their experiences and some of their insights in terms of what they would like professionals, specifically therapists and psychologists, to know, coercive control and their experiences, because I will be presenting at the National Psychology Conference later in this year on coercive control. And I'm very passionate about increasing the knowledge and understanding in our area. I don't think there is enough. And this would be very powerful information for me to be able to integrate into these presentations. So a call out to anyone who has anything to say about whether they've had a good experience or a bad experience, what they have seen, whether it's been them, their child, family report writers. Just please give me that information and I'll do my best to really do it justice and to put it in the face and in the hands of the people who need to really take it into consideration and improve our practices.
It has a real big impact when you can hear the actual voices of people who have been through things, because Krasi and I both went to a convention together and we did hear the voices of some children, and it just floored the room. Everybody paid attention and everybody listened. And I think you guys can have that impact yourself if you're brave enough, and it's okay to share what you think could be done better or how someone helped you that hopefully some other professional could do for somebody else. So that would be great. We'll put the link in the notes below to be able to do that. And if you're already subscribed to our newsletter, you'll receive that link again in our email when this episode comes out. All right, this is more about your legal strategy. So these are some legal strategy questions, Mum. So I'm so glad you're here today. All right, so Samantha's question said, my lawyer has suggested not including coercive control in our financial settlement, stating a reason that I will have to relive an emotional trauma through retelling the lawyer and a psychologist all of it to obtain a report for court proceedings. My lawyer is also concerned that the cost of including coercive control and proving it will not be worth it financially or emotionally. Do you think it would be detrimental or beneficial to my healing to know I put the full picture into the mix of the financial settlement, or should I just let it go? To let it go feels like I'm allowing the abuse to continue. Now, I'm going to get Krasi to answer that last part of the question. But, Mum, what are your thoughts for this situation, for this particular, like Samantha's? Obviously, you don't know the full details, but
no, I don't.
Not to include it.
My belief is that you should always include it if it's safe to do. And you know what I say, if they didn't want you to talk about it, they shouldn't have done it. And you're in fact rewarding him for that behaviour by not mentioning it. So I think put it in. It allows, if you're in court, you're able to tell the court your story. They can then manage your case into the right channels to get it dealt with in the appropriate way. And I think maybe your lawyer is thinking perhaps of criminal proof of coercive control, and that has to be done beyond reasonable doubt and all of the evidence that you would need for a criminal conviction. But that's not the case in the family court. The family court just takes it into account and gives the weight to each factor as they think fit.
Krasi, so in in regards to Samantha, do you think it would be detrimental or beneficial to her healing to know that she put the full picture in the mix? Or should she just let it go?
I would be obviously separating because we're talking about two different things. One is a legal strategy and the other one is a personal strategy for moving forward. And they may look the same or they can look completely different as well. But I think that feeling of staying silent and hiding it just really reproduces the whole feeling throughout the relationship as well. So on a personal level, I would absolutely be encouraging Samantha and anyone in that situation to put it out there. If it doesn't get recognized or if it ends up not getting the kind of consequences and the results you were hoping for, so be it. But at the end of the day, you have said your truth. You have made it clear to yourself and to others that this is indeed what happened and this is my story. And I think that's important in gaining a sense of some kind of recognition and justice going forward.
I get confused a little bit, Mama. Maybe you can explain this. Why do they say it's going to cost you more to prove it when you're already going to court anyway and you're already doing an affidavit anyway and you're already standing in front of the judge anyway? I just don't understand why they say it costs you extra money.
I do think perhaps they've confused the criminal with the court, family court sort of way of looking at it. But also, too, if it's to get psychologist reports and other doctors' reports, really, you don't need someone to certify that you've been coercively controlled. All you need to do is state what had happened. If you've developed post-traumatic stress disorder, maybe a counsellor or a psychologist can give that evidence, but then you've got to prove what it came from. So I don't think it costs much more, Laura. It may be the whole theme of your property settlement, and it may result in a bigger property settlement to you. So, yes, I don't understand why they say it either. It's just
maybe it's more work for the lawyer, and maybe that's what they're trying to avoid in this case.
Maybe they don't want to work more, yes. I think it can be in the too hard basket.
We have an episode called Is Your Lawyer Gatekeeping Your Story? Go and listen to that and ask yourself the questions. Okay, maybe my lawyer is. And unfortunately, not every professional has the guts to do some of this stuff, and they get nervous about it, and they're humans and it's new and it's scary for them too. And I'm not making excuses for them, but I'm just thinking maybe if you're listening today, you've got to think about your lawyer as a human, and they have their own personality, their own fears and their own drives. The drive to win, or is it the drive to do what's best for their client? There's all different reasons people do things. So just make sure you kind of have some understanding of your lawyer when you take the information from them so that you understand the context of where they're coming from maybe. All right, let's get to Anonymous. Anonymous said, what factors do courts consider when determining whether a former partner is entitled to spousal maintenance years after separation, particularly where one party reduced their earning capacity while undertaking the majority of childcare? Legal aid advised against it in mediation due to the other parent not submitting financial disclosure.
Years afterwards.
After.
That's the issue. Yes, that could be an issue. So what the court looks at is it's two things. One is capacity to pay. Oh, actually, that's backwards. The first thing is, do you have a need? And then the second element of it is, do they have a capacity to pay? And it's capacity to work that the court looks at, capacity to earn, not what you're currently doing. So I haven't seen a spousal maintenance claim years after the event since, I reckon, probably the late 80s. It's not like you're expected to work if you can. But if you haven't had your property settlement yet, you aren't out of time for applying for the spousal maintenance, and you have a genuine reason why you can't support yourself, then maybe you do go to court. But if your advisors are worried and they know all of the facts, I would be taking that into account, because you may end up with the risk of costs paying the other side's some of their legal fees.
And now let's go to Gretchen. Gretchen said, how can I deal with my ex-partner's lawyers who appear to be helping them use coercive control tactics so their client gets their own way? For example, they are arranging a property settlement where I end up with the liabilities and basically receive nothing, and my ex walks away with everything. The relationship was financially controlling, and they are now intent on keeping everything themselves.
that just sound like, though, that he's probably bossing them around? And that's just their view, just their version. You have a voice and you can speak up about what's been going on in your relationship. And so they are probably just doing the best they can for their client. Hopefully, I don't want to be an apologist for bullies, but if they've stepped over the line and in ambit claims, as long as you're not in Western Australia, the Central Practice Direction applies to you. Have a look at Schedule 1, and right at the bottom of the page, it puts a couple of sentences there that put the lawyers in the frame if they are helping their client not make proper disclosure or anything else. They can get cost orders against the lawyers personally, and they're supposed to stop acting if someone is not delivering a document to the court. That's actually, Laura, that's not the Central Practice Direction. That's the family rules, FCFCOA rules. So,
and Mum, you wrote a lovely template letter that our members use when these lawyers try these tactics, and they send that, and 9 times out of 10 it works. So it scares the heck out of lawyers knowing that they might be liable for costs as opposed to their own client. So that is hopefully something that you can point them to, Gretchen, and that would be good for you. Now, Miss Resilient, how should private school fees and other extracurricular activities be paid for according to the law? I left the marriage this year. He's been very difficult, manipulative and controlling personality. Our kids attend private school and his child support payments have come at a ridiculously insufficient amount. He refuses to pay any other ongoing child-related costs. I've been a stay-at-home mum while he worked away for years and just barely kept my career going. He wants me to contribute 50% of the children's school fees when he was always the breadwinner. I do not have that money for that. The schools are contacting me now for overdue fees. What else can I do while I'm looking for a new lawyer? Can I go to the police? And I'm confused. Oh, hun. And firstly, that is such a common strategy that we see with these financially abusive poop heads, where they just go, oh, I'm going to do this now and tough luck. And they use other companies and other entities to go for you for money. And in this instance, for Miss Resilience, the school's contacting her for overdue school fees that she obviously can't pay. Is that something that he should be paying? Should he be paying the school fees?
Yes. She should be looking into the Child Support Agency options for reassessing what needs to be paid on the basis that the kids are in the private schools that were chosen when you were a couple. That's one of the grounds, the children being educated in a manner foreseen. So that's one way around it. When you get your property settlement, Ms. Resilient, when you do get your property settlement, make sure the court knows that this man hasn't been contributing, because you will need extra money, because the court will think as soon as the spotlight's off, they'll stop paying their child support. So I think...
So start a spreadsheet,
It's not really a police. Yeah, it's not a police matter, is it?
Unfortunately, it should be, but the police aren't going to take too much notice of it, depending on what state you are. But what you could be doing is starting a little spreadsheet, and every time you have to pay something for the children that he's not going to help pay, that you've asked him to help pay, put it in there and have a total amount. So if you ever go to mediation, you can say, this is how much I've paid already. I'd like that included in my side of the property settlement. Or you could say, this is how much I've had to pay to a judge the entire time while we've been going through this, and I'm not the main breadwinner. This is why I'm going to need a larger portion of the property pool. So
I like that idea, Laura. But I think our parallel thing should be the number of times, or what he does pay, and put it on another side of that ledger, because the court now looks at not just, they used to look at what they'd paid, what they're currently paying, and what they're likely to pay in the future. And now the court just looks at what they've paid. And so that's an assistance to you, because their past behaviour is a great indicator of what's going forward. Isn't it awful, Krasi, how they use the kids?
It is horrible. And there is a whole term around that called spiteful neglect, when you're intentionally, just to cause damage to the other parent, you're neglecting what the children need.
It has to come from a place of where they hate you more than they love their kids, which is...
Yeah, and whether they want to pursue their cause above any other cause, completely neglecting who is being harmed in the process.
Yeah. So trying to punish you as much as possible and not giving a damn about how that affects the people they're supposed to love the most. And in saying that, we've got 2 more questions, but our actual next episode is called Coercive Control and the Children. And we're going to be looking at what it looks like when the control doesn't stop after separation and how sometimes it can move through the kids. And we're going to talk about co-parenting with someone who uses handovers, messages, and the children themselves to keep a hold of you. And most of all, how to protect you and yourself and your kids while you're stuck in the thick of it with a coercive, controlling poo-poo head. So if that's in your world right now, make sure that you've subscribed to this episode, to the podcast, whether you're on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple, or wherever you listen, so that you can get the next episode. But let's get to the last two questions. And this is all about the courage to name it, guys. And I'm going to read them out together, and we're going to talk to everyone who's listening today anyway, because I think a lot of people have this in their heads. So Jesse's question was, I don't feel it's safe to mention family violence in the financial settlement as it would just make things worse. Is there a safeguard for victims of coercive control to have this information seen by a judge, but not the other party? And Sandy's question was, I'm so anxious about bringing up DV in my financial separation. What tips can you give to help us get the courage needed? Thank you for your beautiful work. Oh, thanks, Sandy. Mum, what can they do if they don't feel it's safe to mention it in financial? Can you just show it to the judge?
It's two separate questions there. So the first one is, is there a way she can get the evidence into the court without it, at least into the process and on the court's books without naming it? That there are steps that she can take. The central practice direction says that nothing in that central practice direction is meant to apply if it puts a person at risk, right? So the mediation and all of those things may not have to happen. And you can email direct to the registrar if you have to fill out a notice of risk or a lighthouse that the court does, a lighthouse questionnaire direct to the registrar. The problem is that the other side has to know the case against them. And so they do have to ultimately know what you say and what you do and if there's consequences or not. And I think it was a lot like Krasi was saying about speaking your truth. If you're physically safe, then it might be good for you. I don't think you can ever appease a bully.
Mum just mentions the Lighthouse program and the Everts list, which if you end up on that, and if it does seem to be this bad, you may find yourself on that list, and they have extra safeguards, extra security, and they are very cluey about what's going on, and it's a smoother process than if you were just lumped in with the rest of the people going through court who don't have that experience. Sadly, a lot of people going through court have that experience though. Okay, so Krasi, what tips do you have to get to help Sandy and Jesse to get the courage needed to do this? Because really this is pointing out your ex and saying, you're my abuser. That's the thick of it. And I don't know how anyone right at the beginning particularly has that courage or because you've never done it in your relationship. They've never done it in their relationship. And then we expect them to do it now. What tips do you have?
Yeah, and I don't have the best legal strategy, and I'll leave that to Lynn, but it's more about what feels right at this point for anyone. Because, again, the inability to have a voice, the inability to have your version of events is such a prominent feature of living in this kind of relationship that at the end, when you're out of it, it is such an important story. You're allowed to name it. You're allowed to call it out. And naming it is not inviting a fight. It's not creating problem for someone. That's a normal part of the process. And if someone makes you feel that way, then it says really everything about them and nothing bad about you. So it's hard to find the courage, but at the same time, when you act courageous, you do feel more courageous in the future as well. If you keep acting out the strategy of lay low, say as little as possible, don't rock the boat, then that's what keeps being perpetuated as well. So as long as you can find a good lawyer to really stand you for it and to give you good, proper advice, I would think it's always the better option to be able to speak as early on as possible about this. And the rest is not your problem. The rest is up to the other side to deal with.
And because they know what they did. So you're not telling them anything new. The only thing that they are wanting, the thing you're afraid of, is just telling other people what they did to you, like I said, because they already know. And that it does weaken their hold and weaken their power on you. But if you go to court for property settlement and you don't mention coercive control or your experiences in the relationship right at the start, it should not be a reason for you to not start, okay? And you can say, when you can name it, when you can do it, even if it's halfway through, you can say, up until now, I've been too afraid to say these things. The impact is so bad during the marriage on me that it has extended right into these proceedings, but here are some notes I made at the time. And you can, like, the court may or may not take that as truth or not, but it shouldn't stop you asking for property settlement anyway. It's a layer.
Can I put a little bit of hope there for you, Jessie and Sandy? And that is, I've seen it and it happens so frequently. Mum and I've given it a name and we call it the domestic violence pendulum. And your reactions when you start off leaving your ex are going to be, I don't want to scare them. I don't want to upset them. Everything you do is focused on them and keeping them happy. And then slowly over time, we notice with our members and with a lot of people who have gone through this, they get to the point where they're sick of their crap and they're so over it that they're naming it and shaming it all day long, and to the point where they might even take it too far. And we have to pull them in a bit and go, okay, calm down. Otherwise, you might upset some professionals, etc. I did have a lady ask the other day, I want to start telling my story on social media. Can you ask Mum if that's a good idea? But I'm still in court. And I was like, no, don't do that. People go from not wanting to say anything at all to wanting to tell everyone everything. And that will be you. I promise it'll be you eventually. And it might seem absolutely unbelievable that you would ever be at that stage. But I promise you, with the right support around you and getting away from the bad people that are creating this feeling for you, you will become a stronger, braver person. And you will find your voice, and then people won't be able to shut you up. For the moment, you might be in that space, but I promise you the hope for you is that you will get there like everybody else we've seen who will tell their stories from the rooftops and they can't ever keep you quiet again. Krasi, any last words for Jessie and Sandy?
I think just reiterating what you were saying, Laura, I have seen plenty of times again where that fear and that silence over time has really morphed into a fighting spirit. And that is so much better for your healing and progressing forward, even if by the end of the day you don't get exactly the kind of results you were hoping in court. In terms of your personal life and your sense of self and how you're going to feel about how you approach the situation, I think that is going to make you feel a lot better.
Yeah. Yes. Mum, what would you embroider on a cushion?
Oh, dear. It's a long one again. It's the standard. If they didn't want you to talk about it, they shouldn't have done it.
Perfect. If anyone feels triggered by that, please call 13 11 14 Lifeline. And of course, if you're experiencing any family violence, please call 1-800-RESPECT, which is 1-800-737-732. And call, if you're in danger, please call your emergency service in your country. And of course, in Australia, that's 000. So we will see you all next week. Krasi will be back. We will be talking about coercive control and the kids, co-parenting and dealing with it while you're in the thick of it. Thank you again, Krasi, for your time. We're absolutely loving doing this with you and getting your information out there, helping people who can't go and see someone for the time being. You are a lifeline to people, I believe. And Mum, of course, the information that you're providing and the education you're giving everyone is making the world of difference. So thank you again. We can't thank you enough. We get all the emails all the time saying thank you. So big hugs to both of you and big hugs to anyone who's listening today. I know today was tough and going through this was pretty rough and the messages we're getting are pretty horrid. But we do see people come out the other side of this. You just got to hang in there, guys. Let's get you through this and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks, Krasi. Thanks, Mum. See you guys next week.
Thank you, Krasi. Bye, Laura.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
If you found this podcast helpful, we'd love it if you could rate, review and subscribe. By doing so, you are spreading the word to help someone else just like you. Lynn would like to remind you that this podcast is general advice only and you should always get legal advice in relation to your particular situation. And remember that the Australian laws may have changed since recording.